All right, we're back for the third time. David was just telling us about reading the Heller decision. And were you in Hawaii at the time now? Where were you when you heard that decision? Yeah,
I was on the road between South Dakota and
oh, that's right.
Seattle, and I was in Montana at the time. Uh, and I want to point out that we must be onto something good here, because whenever
Yes.
the tech
I
glitches, they
I
force you to persevere.
yes, I had the same thought.
So I didn't actually read it at first. I just heard about it in the news reports, and I heard about the basic holding that we all have a constitutional right to possess a handgun for self-defense. And I thought, well, I have a shotgun, but I don't have a handgun. I made the decision, I'm going to buy a handgun. And then I actually ran into a buddy of mine on the road. We were traveling near each other, and we texted and we met up on the road for a minute. And he's a West Point grad. And I said, Tom, I've decided to buy a handgun. And he goes, I just bought one.
Wow.
And I said, great. His was a styled out West Point commemorative 1911.
Oh, wow.
And I'm sure he still has it.
That's cool.
And I bought that snub nose 38, 357, actually hammerless, a 5-shot, nice little handgun.
You have a picture of it,
And
and you have a picture of it in here.
yep, but it wasn't the first handgun I ever shot. I was out in South Dakota, and I met somebody who became a really, that's it,
Mhm.
became a really great friend of mine, like a brother, and his name's Face. He goes by the name Face, and he was a gun guy. And everybody, man, if they were as lucky as I was to have a gun guy buddy, like Face, to show the ins and outs. First, the safety, the rules, the 4 rules, and let's go down to the dump and you can shoot my 45. And he had a custom made 45 that he put together himself, 1911, and that was the first handgun I ever shot. And I thought, wow, that was great. And he took many people who had never shot guns before to the range, and that's a very common way to demystify firearms for people, is to let them shoot them safely and see what it's about. And so I had shot his gun when I was in South Dakota visiting, and then when Heller came out, I decided, I'm going to get my own handgun, and I went through the steps, and I got it. And then later on in the book, I do go to Hawaii. I have to go register it. I have to go get fingerprinted for no good reason. It's pretty intense in Hawaii, as you probably know.
Yeah.
Become even more intense in Hawaii. In fact, they later instituted this thing called it's like called a callback or something. Do you know about this? Where they if you have a handgun now registered in Hawaii, they send a request to the FBI that if you're ever charged with a crime or get convicted of a crime, they want an answer back to Hawaii so they can take your gun away in Hawaii.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
But it only
If you're
applies
if
to
you're
Hawaii residents.
charged, did you say if you're charged?
I mean, it's probable conviction. I don't know. But
Okay.
it's a process where they ask to be notified
Wow.
for other crimes so they can remove your gun rights.
Interesting.
It's an enforcement mechanism. But
Wow.
the arc of the story, I learned how to use firearms, and then start to
Yeah.
carry a firearm. And I'm presented with the terrible situation one time in South Dakota where I actually have to pull my firearm in a defensive gun use against basically an insane killer.
Wow.
And that guy was a bad dude.
Was that on the Indian reservation there?
It was on the reservation, and
Yeah.
I had that pocket pistol,
Mhm.
had it in my shorts. I'm not a huge person. I'm like 5'6.5", 145 pounds maybe, depending. And this guy, after a sweat lodge, he was making friendly small talk and even suggesting, oh, I should be his lawyer and represent him in some pro bono thing as Indian rights. And I entertained a lot of these kind of conversations with people. I made myself very accessible to people of all walks of life, if they wanted to throw their story at me, and maybe I could help or refer them to somebody in the legal profession who might be able to help. And my mistake at that time was not realizing that he was following me out into the dark parking lot.
Wow.
And I
Wow.
could have been more aware, head on a swivel type of thing, but I was
Right.
I was lulled into a little lack of situational awareness, you might say.
Yep.
And but we got out, and he kept trying to sell me different things I didn't need or want, like offered to sell me eagle parts and eagle feathers, which of course is illegal. I don't
Yeah.
want that. Offered to sell me a t-shirt. I don't want a t-shirt. And then he started really encumbering my space, and
Yeah.
I turned to him as we were just coming close to my vehicle, and I told him, I said, hey, you're crowding me. You need to give me a little bit more space here. And he wasn't used to being talked to like that.
Hmm.
And he kept coming in on me. And I said, hey, I need a little more space than you're giving me right now. And he said something like, I don't care. I don't give a fuck what you want. And I go, well, I don't know why you would talk to somebody like that if you wanted them to be your lawyer. And he said, you're
Wow.
not my fucking lawyer. And he like kind of moved to lunge at me.
Wow.
And I stepped back, and that's in the instant I was like, well, it's now or never. I wouldn't recommend getting thrown to the ground in the dark anywhere, but on the Indian reservation, that could be a death sentence.
Yep.
And so I pulled my gun, and he saw it, and he started running, because I don't care who you are, what kind of a bad dude you are, how many times you've been to prison, how many people you've killed. Nobody wants to get shot. Okay. And he ran. And then I thought, well, I'm still sitting here with my gun in my hand out in the dark in the middle of reservation, about 50 to 100 feet from anybody. I don't know. I think maybe I should blow off a warning shot. And where I was, it was not illegal to do it. It is illegal in some places. I'm not
Right.
recommending this to people who are in
Sure.
a dense area. What goes up must come down. Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
But this is a very sparsely populated area. And I launched a warning shot, and I screamed at the top of my lungs, I need help. Boom. And a full load 357 with a little fireball at the end came out. And then I got in my vehicle with my handgun out and the window down, and waited for what was next. Started up my vehicle, turned the lights on, and prepared for combat. And this buddy of mine, just a very powerful individual, huge, reformed, did 14 years in state pen on a crime, did his time, did his parole, got out, was living there on the reservation in a trailer home. He was married into the family that owned the land. He was a friend of mine, and he came running out in his slippers and said, what's going on? By then, the guy who attacked me had hopped in his truck and was trying to get out, and my buddy stopped him and said, what the hell is going on? And of course, the guy who attacked me told my buddy, pointed at me and said, that guy is trying to kill me. He goes, what? You're saying that my friend Dave, who's half your size, is trying to kill you? I don't think so. What's really going on? And the guy made up some mumbo jumbo, and then my friend told him, he said, you are banned from this property. We'll never see you here again.
Hmm.
And then as he had this little bat in his hands, about this big, and my buddy whipped that bat just perfect. I'll never forget the sight of it. He whipped that bat, and it ricocheted off the bed of the truck, smashed the guy's back window, flew up in the air, and he caught it in one fluid motion. Like,
Wow.
it was pretty cool.
Wow.
And then he came over to me and he said, we got to get you out of here. That guy's probably going to go run to somebody's house, and he's going to go get a gun, and he's going to come back out. He's going to come gunning for you. And then we did a high-speed caravan at 70 miles an hour on dust roads off the res, which was also kind of harrowing.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, man, I got to get a higher capacity firearm here. You know, I shot one of my 5. I only have 4 rounds left.
Right.
And then I went out and I bought a Glock 30 with a 10-round mag, and fine firearm, by the way, that has a light and a laser on it too. So it's a little more capable that way.
Yeah.
That was intense. And I was a little bit shook up from that, you know. That was intense. So I went to a buddy of mine, this isn't in the book, who's a real knowledgeable guy. We do ceremony together, and he told me, you know, when I have a problem like that with somebody, I pray for them that they get what they need. I don't know. He goes, I'm not God. I don't know what they need, but God knows what they need. And I pray that they get what they need in a good way. So they'll stop hurting other people. And that's what I pray for them. I don't pray for me. I pray for them. And so I thought, that's a good idea. I'm going to pray. And anytime this comes up, or I have this image, you know, there's a little bit of post-traumatic stress that comes from interaction like that, you know, getting attacked and all. And I later learned the guy was a straight up killer, a murderer, and a rapist, you know, because I had heard when a friend of mine was young, this guy came to her dinner table trying to impress her dad. Her dad was a gang boss. And this guy who attacked me, he brought a buddy of his to the table and cut the dude's throat at their dinner table to make an impression to get into the gang. That's the kind of guy that is the guy who attacked me, a straight up killer. And I'm glad I didn't know anything like that at the time. You know, it just wasn't for me to know. I was just defending myself.
Right.
And, but I prayed every time I came to me that I thought of him or that situation. I prayed he should get what he needs in a good way. And then I later found out he died having sex.
Really?
So I think that's what he needed.
Wow.
In a good way.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so somehow you, in your thinking, I'm remembering something you said about Amherst, your senior thesis. Your senior thesis was on civil rights, I think, right? Is that right?
It was the influence of Socratic and Christian thought on civil disobedience. And
Okay.
so
Civil disobedience. Okay.
I looked at the motivating factors of people who engaged in modern civil disobedience and found their common root in either and or combination of the Socratic dialogues of being honest and true to yourself, and to not choosing a known evil over an unknown, for example, in the case of Socrates, or the original teachings of Jesus as manifested in the 4 Gospels, and how if you ask the civil disobedience, the people who, you know, rejected going to their draft boards, didn't go to Canada, but did stand up and express themselves and their conscientious objections, and you ask them why they did what they did and refused to do what their conscience would not allow, they described as their reasons
Hmm.
things that could be rooted in those concepts of Socratic thought or Christian thought.
Yeah. So when you went to law school, I know you weren't a civil rights attorney thinking, well, a law student. I don't know how you were as a law student. Were you thinking you wanted to do business law in law school, or did you originally go for more idealistic reasons of civil rights, being a civil rights hero? You wanted to be, um, what's that guy's name on To Kill a Mockingbird? The not Gregory Peck, but the guy in the story.
Clarence
Um,
Darrow? No.
no, not him. The Jem's father. I forget his name. Anyway, but yeah, the hero. Did you want to be the hero attorney, like civil rights attorney?
Initially I wanted to do litigation that way, and then I ran into
Atticus Finch. I think his name
Atticus
is
Finch.
Atticus Finch. Okay,
You know,
sorry.
I ran into civil procedure, like it's the first year course you have to take all year, and then evidence, and I just wasn't vibing it. And I
Yeah.
confided one day in a friend of mine. I said, I don't know what I'm going to do here. I wanted to be a litigator and go to court and stuff, but I'm just not really getting this whole this whole civil procedure and this whole evidence thing. And he turned to me, he goes, dude, go corporate. Everybody's going corporate, man. And I don't even know what that is. What do corporate lawyers do? And he goes, I don't know, contracts, corporations, stuff like that. I'll check it out. And then I started taking some business law courses and corporate and tax and different things. And I found I had some natural interest and ability in it. And I shifted over and never looked back.
Hmm.
So you know, that's my aptitude is business and corporate.
Well, I was okay. That's helpful. I was particularly taken by the change in you that see just kind of wondering where to peg it, if there is a place, and maybe we don't know, or maybe it's not important, but it's just the interesting thing of when in your kind of in your deep background, if there is such a thing, um, that helped you make the switch that you had that other people didn't have, of starting to think in terms of there's something I can do to be my own first responder. There's you don't have to just sit around and be a victim. In other words, and what I love about the book is there's this epilogue. There's a chapter called "Do Something." When you hear that a lot, do something, and you've got a nice little turn of phrase here. Let's see if I can find it. You say, sadly, this is on page 51. Sadly, there is such a thing as evil in the world. And then you mentioned Katrina. It's interesting. Uh, and I don't know if people remember, but in Hurricane Katrina, the police went around to some of these really vulnerable people and were collecting firearms from them, making them even more vulnerable. And that's a particularly heinous thing. And you say the notion that it should be illegal to loan a rifle to a neighbor during times of natural disaster is contrary to the fundamental human right to live and survive. And then you say, of course, no one wants to get shot. You say it's the great equalizer in terms of having a gun. It's a great equalizer for the simple reason that no one wants to get shot. This is how an elderly person in a wheelchair can defend against a large assailant. That is why a vast majority of defensive gun uses only involve brandishing, that is, displaying the firearm. and not the discharge of the weapon, which is, and then you connect it to due process, with this, which is the threat for red flag laws. And this is a really powerful part right here, page 53. Coming to terms with do something, quote unquote, do something positive that does not undermine the rights of others is challenging. That is, I don't know why that stood out to me, but it's the do something mentality that doesn't go the extra step and say, well, hold on, am I harming people by taking away their rights? And you're saying, no, do something positive that does not undermine the rights of others. And that seems to be the link here. And then, I mean, I'm just dropping these gems here on people. No pun intended, as I look at this picture of a bomber here. But you have this, on page 54, you have this illustration of the survivorship bias. Now that is very interesting. Can you walk us through the survivorship bias? There's the picture of the bomber with all those bullet holes in it.
Yeah, it's something that came up really interesting. I was doing some reading, and just as Chuck and I were putting together the final part, I said, Chuck, can we include this? Because I think this is really cool, that all these bombers would go fly over Europe to go on bombing missions in World War II. And some of them would get really shot to pieces, right?
Yeah.
And well, they all got shot to pieces. It was terrible. If you see the incredible documentary footage about, I think it was the 8th Air Force and the brunt that they took, you know, these heroes going up every day into the incredible flak. But a lot of these bombers, despite being shot to pieces, made it back. And at first, they looked at this and they said, you know, how do we interpret this? Where should we put the armor, you know, to fortify these planes?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
a
This is
mathematician
very
came up,
interesting. Very interesting. Yeah.
right? And mathematician came up with the concept and said, hey, we don't have to put armor on the places that got all shot up and those planes made it back, because these planes can fly with bullet holes in all those places. We need to look at the other places, right? And so if you think about it, and it's a little bit of a mental leap, right, to apply it to guns and gun control, but you know, the survivorship bias, when you look at mass shootings, the question that's not being asked similarly is, what about all the places where the shootings didn't happen?
Right.
Why is it that they didn't happen there? Were there a lot of guns there? You
Mhm.
know, were there schools that were hardened? Did they have armed school resource officers? Did they have armed, you know, a high population of armed citizens with concealed carry? To go back to our earlier point, if somebody had been there, they could have taken the gunman out. So,
Yeah.
you know, it just kind of helped focus on that incomplete story that's part of that narrative. And then when you look at the do something part, you know, I went back and I looked at that a little bit before our interview. You know, I'm still very happy with the writing, and I still believe 100% what I wrote in there, that there are some things you can do. And you know, if you
Yeah.
don't feel like you're a person who can be trusted with a firearm, okay, good on you for knowing yourself, right? Go get a first aid kit. Learn how to stop a bleed. Do you know how to
Right.
apply a tourniquet? Do you know how to
Right.
save somebody's life? Or are you just going to sit home and whine? You
Yeah.
know, is my perspective. Like, you know, there's so much that can be done to save human life, whether it's your own, your family, or others. And another point I make in the book, and I want to reiterate here, and I listened to some of your other podcasts. I want to tip my hat to MacGyver, who came on, right? And is the Harley riding gun guy,
Oh yeah.
right?
Maverick.
And he made the point he would rush in. I'd like to think that if he were there that day, he would have rushed in toward the gunfire. But that's not anybody's duty, okay? Unless you're a member, a trained law enforcement member, even then the courts have ruled you have no duty, okay?
Right.
But if you are a trained member of law enforcement, perhaps you do have a duty to not stand outside the school and go in and take care of things, But if you're just Jane or John Q. Public and you're armed, your duty is to get home to your family. Your duty is to get through that danger, shelter, I'm not saying leave people behind, but shelter who you can and get to safety. That's, you could go above and beyond, right? And, maybe like, in my honors thesis, I talked about supererogatory action, where you have a love of humanity that's greater than your love of your own self. You're willing to put your life on the line for others, like soldiers and cops and firemen and first responders and these great men and women that are in our society that have made a conscious choice to do those things. That's not everybody's cup of tea, right? But if that is your cup of tea, you be empowered to go do those things and not be in fear of legal prosecution, is my suggestion.
Right. That's right.
And so, I think that a lot of people who are unfamiliar with guns are just that. I think some of those people who are really terrified, like have phobias of guns, and who also tend to say the kind of things on Twitter that are, insane, they know they can't be trusted with guns because a lot of them are off.
That's very insightful.
And they don't want others to have guns because they're like, well, if I can't trust myself with a gun, I don't want that person to be trusted.
They assume that they can't, you can't trust yourself and that they can't trust you. Of course, my individual rights don't really depend on whether someone else can trust me, right? I mean, it's not like I need permission to go to church on Sunday or something.
Well, I guess it depends if we're in COVID or not. Maybe you do.
Well, yeah, there you go. I guess I walked right into that one.
But you don't. But they make you believe you might. Anyway, that's a different discussion.
But it's related. It is interesting. Yeah, that link in people's minds. I think it's now you have this very powerful sentence here on page 55 at the bottom. You say each human has the innate right to prevent their own murder. And man, that seems like to quote one of Graham Greene's titles, the heart of the matter. Each human has the innate right to prevent their own murder and to prevent serious injury being done to them and their families. And then your dialogical, do you agree? There's the Socratic influence there. You're not dogmatic in this book. You're very forceful, but you're inviting a dialogue and you're asking people to come to terms with this. I mean, it seems like, how could you disagree with that? Is it true that the police have no legal duty to be a bodyguard to any individual person?
Oh, yeah, you can look up. There's cases that say there's no duty for the police to intervene. There's Supreme Court cases that talk about that. I'm not an expert in this field, so I don't have the cases to cite.
I don't have them off the top of my head either, but I know about them.
Yeah.
Chuck would know.
And
I think a lot of people don't know that. I think a lot of people, when they're in that kind of traumatic state, it's not fight or flight. It's at the time, it's like freeze or dorsal vagal shutdown freeze, which is a combination of fight or flight and dorsal vagal. It's like in the middle. It's immobilization, and then it's a fight or flight kind of thing for the legislative action. Do something, and you're fighting, to push through these insane plethora of gun control stuff. Doesn't matter what it is, whether it's concealed carry, expanding sensitive locations like they just tried to do in California to basically include all of California as a sensitive place. It could be magazine capacity. Somehow the 11th round is all of a sudden dangerous. It could be registration. And you talk about registration attempts, which sent a chill through my spine when I read that.
Oh yeah.
The background check
Hawaii.
issue. Yeah, the background. It sounds nice at first. It's like, okay, I know it's a federal law that felons can't have a firearm, which, by the way, that's an interesting topic I'd like to. Have you read Amy Coney Barrett's decision on that when she was on the Fifth Circuit, I believe it was, or the Seventh? I forget which one it was.
I haven't.
She wrote a dissent on felons in possession. And I was immediately a fan after I read that, because she basically applied the Heller test to felon in possession laws. It was a nonviolent felon in that case. It was called Cantor versus Barr, the case. Barr was the attorney general at the time, and
Like a white collar crime?
yeah. It was a Medicaid fraud, and it was, I think it was over a decade prior. It was a serious crime. I mean, I don't want to, he pilfered hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was bad. He used the mail. It was fraud. And but he wasn't violent. And she made this distinction between the kind of crime he was guilty of, and was a long time ago. He hadn't had any problems since. And he's not in prison. I mean, he's not on probation, so it's not like he's disarmed because he's in prison. I mean, he's experiencing this civil death, as she called it, walking around otherwise a free person. I mean, he's got all sorts of other rights. He can have an attorney. He can have a jury trial. He can have a right to confront witnesses against himself. He can have due process. Those rights aren't taken away from him. He can go to church.
I mean, I have a view on it that's, I'm not a Second Amendment lawyer,
yeah,
but I have a view on it that's perhaps a little controversial, and that is, the right to keep and bear arms comes from God. I believe in God. I've had certain experiences in my life that make it so I can't not believe in God and know that there is a God that's all powerful, compassionate, is rooting for us to succeed and to be happy. And in my view, and I explained this once to a buddy of mine who was a felon, that guy who was in state prison for 14 years. And and he goes, well, I just don't understand. I did my time and I'm a different person now. And why is it I lose my right to defend myself with a gun?
Yeah.
And I go, well, this is going to sound lawyerly, but quite honestly, I don't think you lost your right to keep and bear arms because it comes from God. It can't be taken away. You just lost your right to not be at risk of going to prison again for exercising your God-given right to keep and bear arms. It's a limitation of the Second Amendment, which is a limitation on the government from restricting a natural right. That's not actually a loss of your natural right. If it's a right. You didn't lose it.
Yeah.
It's just we live in a society that's made
respected.
a bunch of decisions, and you came out on the wrong end of the calculation because of the class of activity that you got involved in and how it's treated and judged in our society and in our law.
Right.
But if somebody's bearing down on you, you don't have to just take the bullet. You didn't lose your right to be alive. That wasn't for the government to take away, in my view.
Yeah. Right.
Suppose we could talk about the death penalty or something else, but I'm referring to you get this right to keep and bear arms to defend your own life that God gave you.
Right. Right.
And nobody can say you lose that innate natural right. The
Yeah.
problem is there's some awful circumstances and
Yeah.
consequences that the legal system can put on you for daring to exercise your natural right
Yeah.
in a way that society is deemed unlawful.
Right. Yeah. And I think that was what I got from Amy Comey Barrett's dissent there in Cantor versus Barr, which is that she said, well, she actually would change that. She would say the legal system can, I mean, there is a federal law, that can punish him for having a firearm quite severely, and just to be prepared to defend himself. But she would say that that's not the way it should be, at least for non-violent felons like he was. It's interesting thing to ponder, how, maybe we should talk about the registration issue, because the background check really is dependent on the felon issue, and basically taking a class of people and saying you're excluded from the right to defend yourself with a firearm. In other words, the powerful sentence I just read on bottom page 55, each human has an innate right to prevent their own murder. There is a federal law that infringes on that for some people, like felons who are out of prison and rehabilitated otherwise. But the background check really requirement kind of hinges on that whole scheme. And you were worried in the book about background checks because they would lead, at least universal background checks, I think is the way you put it, because it would lead to a national gun registry. And we had a guy on the podcast. His name is Dr. Stephen Hallbrook, and he's an attorney. He's also got a PhD. He won Prince versus United States before the Supreme Court, and he wrote a book called Gun Control in the Third Reich. And we had him on to talk about that book. And gun registration was a huge part of that book. The pre-Nazi German government had required a registration scheme. Not unlike you see very popular in some circles now, people want to do.
Well, the history, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the 1968 Gun Control Act was based on that German law.
I didn't know that.
If you do the research and you look up
know
some of the
that.
writings that emanated from Jews for the Preservation of Firearm Ownership, JPFO, the guy who was the lead drafter of the 1968 Gun Control Act was involved in the Nuremberg trials, and so had a copy of that German gun control law translated to English, and it became the basis of the 1968 Gun Control Act. So that's not like conspiracy theory stuff. You can trace the lineage.
And the Jews for the Preservation of Firearm Ownership, that group was not on board with the 1968 law, right?
I think if you research that
I would
group,
hope
and
not.
by the way, they have some really great promotional items and slogans like "Nothing says never again like an armed Jew."
David, your last name is Frankel.
It
And I
is.
wanted to ask you, do you have Jewish heritage?
I do. I have an uncle who went to a concentration camp.
Hmm.
And so I'm not into gun registration.
Yeah,
at all.
I can
I
imagine.
have done it a couple of times
Yeah.
in very limited circumstances. When I was in Hawaii, I was willing to register the 2 guns I brought to Hawaii to be in compliance with Hawaii law.
Mhm.
And there's a separate class of guns that are registered under the National Firearms Act of 1934. And machine guns, by their nature, are dangerous and unusual weapons. Okay, I'll acknowledge that.
Sure.
If you ever have shot one, you can perceive why they would be dangerous and unusual. And you know, in the free states, you're able to get a machine gun if you want one. By the way, in listening to a couple of your podcasts, there's a couple of commentators who have somewhat misdescribed the situation. You know, in 1986, when Reagan closed the list, it meant that private ownership of newly purchased machine guns were prohibited, but there are 300,000 machine guns that are freely transferable among private citizens. And if you can pass a background check for a handgun and you live in a free state and you're willing to go through the process and submit your fingerprints and picture and pay $200, you can get a tax stamp and you can own a machine gun. Not a problem. In fact, it's great. It happens to be class 3 gun guys are the highest echelon of gun guys in a way. Everybody's been background checked by the ATF.
Right.
And it gives you a comfort level. Everybody's legit.
Gotcha.
But are these dangerous guns? Yeah, you can have an open bolt submachine gun, and if it falls on the ground, it can keep firing.
Yeah.
So you got to be careful with those things.
Yeah.
You know, should those be registered? Probably. I don't know. Maybe. Am I against the registration of them? Not in the same way.
Right.
It's just not an issue for that many people.
Yeah.
Although I will say there's only one recorded crime ever committed with an NFA registered weapon, and it was a police officer who shot his wife with a Tommy gun.
Oh,
So
wow.
other than that, you have 300,000 machine guns lawfully held by private citizens, and there's not one crime committed with any of them. Just think about that for a second, especially those people who think that they should be scared of other people being armed. You know, if there was something to be scared of, you'd know about it.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's
My bit
interesting.
about the NFA.
I think I did.
NFA
I
guns are
didn't know
great.
that all of that background. I didn't know it was that many. That's for sure. There's a way to find out which ones are for sale. I bet the price is through the roof because
Yeah,
it's
you
such
can
a
go to
limited market.
machinegunprices.com, I think,
Yeah.
and you can see the market rate for different guns.
Wow.
But it's very
So
complicated.
the market rate would tank if for some reason that list was reopened later.
You know, it's funny, but I wasn't old enough when Reagan closed the list. Okay, I missed it by about 11 days.
Oh, wow.
But if I had been 21 a few months earlier, and if I had been savvy to this, the smartest thing I could have done would have been to buy a bunch of full auto Sears, which you are like $5 to $10 pieces of metal, right? Put a serial number on them, register them with the federal government, because right after the list closed, that $10 piece of metal is worth $20,000.
Wow.
Yeah, because you can drop it into any AR and it makes the AR full auto.
Ah,
Now, there's another thing.
interesting.
You can't do this in California, but let's say a non-Californian who lives in a free state wants a brand new machine gun. You're allowed to have one. You just have to have it as a dealer sample. And in order to do that, you have to become what's called a SOT, a special occupational taxpayer, which means you pay a couple $1,000s and you jump through some hoops and you become a class 3 FFL, a class 3 dealer, right? And if you're a class 3 dealer, you're allowed to have at any one time a brand new machine gun as a dealer sample.
Hmm.
So these guns are out there, and in places like South Dakota, Wyoming, Kentucky, people enjoy shooting machine guns.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
and it's enjoyable.
They probably enjoyed it more before ammo prices went through the roof.
There is that.
It's
Yeah,
like
there is that.
every magazine is like it's like a whole meal at McDonald's. It's
You
actually
know,
more than that.
the first time you shoot a machine gun, you have a right to keep your finger on the trigger and just see that beautiful stream of brass like a ribbon fly out the side. And it takes about 2 seconds, and you're like, wow, I that was 20, 30 rounds. Basically, that was $40.
Yeah,
Uh, I
right.
think I'll get more precise. And then among machine gun people, the trick is to squeeze off ones and twos with accuracy
Yeah.
and stuff like that. And,
Are there any 22 full machine guns
oh
out
yeah,
there?
oh
Are
yeah.
there? Oh, that'd be fun. Because you don't, it's a lot less ammo. I mean, per round. Oh,
The
that's
best
cool.
is when if somebody like a buddy of mine has a registered, and they're called registered transferable, meaning they were in private hands in May of 1986, such that they can be transferred to authorized people with ATF prior approval. And so he got one that his dad bought. He's in South Dakota, and it's a modified full auto AR. And so he can put a 22 on the top of it if he wants. He can
Oh,
he can fire 5.56 out of it if he wants. And um, anyway,
wow.
I
Well, that's cool.
sidetracked. It's not really about my book, but there is a
Sure.
gun culture that Californians are missing out on.
Yeah, no kidding. I'm reminded of it all the time.
Well, it wasn't meant to salt in your scratch,
No, no, it's great to know about it. I'm glad it's still there in America, and I want to. It's my goal to preserve it. As far as gun culture goes, I think you mentioned gun culture. Do you think that gun culture is healthy? And what do you mean by gun culture? Is it do you mean training kids in this stuff? Because seems like people are trained young, grow up, and they're not idiots
Well,
later.
if you ask any of my kids, I'll spot test them. The other day, one of my kids was sitting on a chair watching the cartoon, and I said, "What do you do if you ever see a gun?" And right away he says, "Don't touch it. Run and get an adult." And you can spot test them, and if you say because they could be in a situation where some other family has a gun around and the other kids haven't been told that. And of course, what are you going to
Yeah,
do as soon
right.
as, oh, look at my uncle's here and he's got a gun, look at this. It would be my kid who says, "Hey, don't touch that," and run out of the room and go get an adult right away. Like my kid might save those other kids. So there's that aspect. I took the advice of my buddy Face, who I mentioned earlier. He had raised the kids with guns, and he said the first thing you want to do, and I did all this, is for one, you take them to the gun range as early as you can, like when they're 2 years old. You don't let them shoot the gun, but you show them the gun, and you let them with earphones and from a safe distance see what it looks like when you shoot the gun, because it makes a big boom and a fireball comes out of the front of it. And right away, they don't want it. They don't want to touch that. That's a scary thing. So let them know what power is in that item without putting the item in their hands. The other thing is, if they know you carry a gun, they see it all the time, right? So,
Right.
So, I would tell them when they were young, if you ever want to see daddy's gun, you just have to ask daddy. Well, that used to happen. "Daddy, can I see your gun?" Well, never with the magazine, never loaded, right? So I unload it, I clear it, I verify it, and then I say, "Here, sure, you can you can hold it. I've got the bullets. I've got the magazine. Well, you know what happens? They get bored in about 10 seconds and they're like, here, right? Oh, can I see the other part? Well, sure, I'll trade you here.
That's
And
interesting.
it only comes up a few times because it's not an attractive nuisance at that point. It's
Yeah.
just like a hammer, you know? And
Yeah.
after you see it the first time, why would he want to ask for it? There's
Right.
no mystery. He doesn't have
Oh,
to
man.
sneak in and go try to find it because all he knows, he just can touch it anytime he asks
That's
for
genius.
it, you know? And then
That
finally,
that
when they do,
understands child psychology so well.
it's
That is
essential. I
genius.
recommend this
Yeah,
to
yeah.
parents that have children at gun owner
Wow.
parents, you know? And finally, you do take them to the range when you can. You do start them out on a little cricket 22 and get them to enjoy what it's like to hit the target. And it's also a very satisfying time, you know, as a parent, you're wrapping your arms around your child. They got their earphones on, their glasses. It's already a big deal because you come to the shooting range. All this safety stuff is going on. They finally get their chance. They pop and they hear the ping and they smile, you know, they're happy. Like that was cool, Dad, you
Yeah.
know, and have those times. And then later on, guns come up, they'll think back and they'll be like, no, I know a little about this.
Yeah. What was it like growing up in Long Island for you? Did you have any of that gun culture? Did you know people with guns?
I knew I had relatives who had hunting guns on their walls, and in the living room, but I wasn't ever asked to touch them or do anything more than look at them, you know,
Mhm.
like bolt action rifles and lever action rifles. When I grew up in New York, they didn't have the same, other than the absurd laws on carrying pistols and stuff. They had, you know, pretty non-insane laws concerning having a hunting rifle or going hunting and sharing rifles and things like that when I was younger. But I didn't experience hardly any of it. I never got to shoot a gun till I was an adult. And
Were you curious about it when you were a kid? Like
was I
when you
curious?
Yeah, when you saw those rifles, were you curious?
Well, sure, I was
Did you want to
curious.
hold it?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I was never invited to.
Right.
And I suppose if I had ever been left alone with them, I might have picked them up off the wall and see what they were like, but I
Right.
didn't. So
Do you feel comfortable sharing the town that you grew up in Long Island?
I
The
don't
area?
mind.
So,
It was a place called Massapequa,
okay.
birthplace to the likes of the Baldwin family, the Baldwin
I
brothers,
know.
the
Yeah, yeah.
actors, and
Yeah, sure.
and
Jerry Seinfeld's from there.
Jerry Seinfeld
Yeah.
and Joey Buttafuoco. Is those three names, you know, link
Sure, yeah.
Massapequa.
So you had a Jerry Seinfeld kind of a area there, background. Yeah, it's interesting. So it's not the city, it's different. I'm having a hard time visualizing exactly what it's like there. It's like a suburb, and are there any rural areas that are close by?
Not close by. It was more or less like classic suburban, uh, you know, um,
Hot summers, cold winters, normal
yeah,
seasons? Okay.
yeah, seasonal, you know, it was a fine place to grow up.
So it's just basically classical America kind of. Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you attracted by the city? Did you always look over and go, yeah, I want to go to law school. Was there a kind of a vortex attracting you?
I went to NYU Law because it was the best law school I got into.
Okay.
And I was lucky to get in there just because it was so competitive, especially because I applied to school, went to school during the time of affirmative action, where you know, if you were not a minority, you
Right.
had to do that much better to get into a school.
I'm glad
And
you
of course,
explained that because I knew what you were talking about, but someone else out probably don't know what they're reading between the lines about what you're talking about.
well,
And
it's just that
it was harder for you to get into law school because you had competition that was kind of
there
artificial
was a
competition.
thing that and now it's, from what I understand, it's much more difficult because of the whole wokeness thing. But
Oh,
back then there was a percentage. So for example, uh, they would reserve a certain percentage of the class for people who were not
right.
white, middle class type of people. And
In other words, it wasn't based on merit for that group.
well, it was and it wasn't. In other words,
Okay.
uh, you know, for example, if they said we're going to admit 20% of people from a certain background, uh, then you still had to be pretty darn smart to get into these schools. But somebody with grades lower than mine would get a spot before I got a spot. So I needed my grades to be much higher, more consistent, to have a chance of getting into the other non-reserved portion of this class.
So when you went to law school in New York City, this is pre-Giuliani, right?
Right.
Okay. Was it dangerous? Did you feel like you
Oh
were
yeah. It was way dangerous. In fact, one of my law school buddies was riding his bike uh, outside of where he, quote, should have been. He was over by Alphabet City, and a gang of kids attacked him with chains and beat the heck out of him, took his bike, and put him in the hospital. There were a lot of scaffolds there at the time. It was kind of like the David Dinkins phase of New York City. You would hold your breath when you'd have to walk under in a dark alley of scaffolding, you know, along a whole city block, and you weren't 100% sure how you were going to come out the other side. It was
sounds horrible.
you know, it was sketchy, and you know, there was a lot of boiling violence. I haven't been to New York in a long time, but everybody took the subway unless you were very, very wealthy. You know, everybody mixed it up on the subway, and there were some explosive personalities on the subway.
Yeah.
So
There's
anyway,
a show called Blue Bloods, and the very first episode of that whole show involves a concealed carry guy, a guy that's concealed carrying not without a license on the subway. And the punishment that Tom Selleck, I don't know if you know the show, but Tom Selleck, who's a member of the NRA, by the way, Tom Selleck, in real life, I mean, not on the show, maybe on the show, I don't know, but it's his name is Reagan on the show, and I felt disappointed by the episode because they punish him, and he's just trying to defend his. I mean, he was purely defensive, because he felt in danger, and he was in danger, and he used the firearm in self-defense. And it makes me think of the Bruin decision that just came out. I don't know if you had a chance to read that, but
I read most of it.
okay.
Haven't finished it.
Well, it involves New York. It involves New York City, and uh, I really feel for people in New York City. I don't know. Do you have any insight on why people are so crazy there as far as like defending yourself? Why does it take the Supreme Court to basically say to New York City, you can't just do whatever you want with taking people's rights away to defend themselves? Do you have any insights on?
I mean, you know, it's been so long since I lived there or
Yeah.
even been there. Um, haven't been there in almost 10 years. I don't think I'll ever go back there again.
Wow.
Uh, uh, Especially in light of what they did to the people during COVID, and you know, introducing vax passports, and the way that they're treating people. Last time I was there, it was a surveillance state. There were a lot of cameras, you know,
Oh,
everywhere.
Not good.
Um,
Not good.
and I just
That's
I
creepy.
do echo what Chuck says about the blue resistance, and
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
Still happening. It's happening in New York too.
well, I know. Did you just see that the mayor of New York is adding to the requirement for concealed carry applicants to give 4 personal references, and they're going to send police to knock on those doors and ask, "Oh, what do you think about this person having a gun?" You know, um, and so any excuse to, this goes back to my comment about find a way to do something that doesn't infringe other people's rights.
Yeah.
But there's a category of people, sadly, who they don't care about anybody's rights. They care about raw power and
Yeah.
control of others. And it's
Make me
you know,
feel better. I feel afraid. Make me feel better. That's that kind of thing. And you're right. The COVID connection was totally accurate because that's how that whole thing went down. It's all about make me feel better.
yeah, and New York used to have, when I lived there, there were some characteristics that made it a really awesome place to be. Even though there was some element of crime, uh, there were incredible restaurants, right?
Yeah.
Bars, music. Go down Bleecker Street and see some of the greatest independent musicians and musicians pre-signing, like that you'd ever want to see. Jazz, blues, really. New York had this attraction to it, that it had a level of excellence to it, had a level of honesty to it. I used to say that, if there was an incident involving a road incident or something in New York, you could poll the immediate people around, and you could find out like who was in the right and who was in the wrong pretty immediately. Like people would just call it like they see it, just based on, like, just the facts, man, kind of a thing. And that got withered away, and I'm
Right.
not sure all of why, but I definitely perceive it right now through the actions of the officials who run it, and the way that they've taken advantage of the regulatory state to, for
Yeah.
example, deprive people of their livelihoods if they won't get the injection, and
It's horrible.
to take positions where uh, they really are using brute force of law to impose their will on other human beings.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
and that's wrong in my
Yeah.
view. I'll
I
just
agree.
make a moral judgment that that's wrong.
I
And
agree.
uh so don't live there if you don't like it.
Yeah.
I you know Move.
New
It's
York
a
has a
shitty place
long,
anyway. There's too many people who live there. It's too loud. You can't see the stars at night. Okay. Think about this. And I know I'm going on a little tangent,
no,
but
I love it.
in New
That's what
York
makes it great.
and Washington, D.C., you look up at the stars at night, and there's so much ambient city light that you are lucky if you see 1 or 2 stars.
Mm.
Okay. Try going to South Dakota or Wyoming and look at the Milky Way and
Wow.
tell me that the quality of life for a group of people that never receive starlight is anywhere close to the group of people who do, because you can't,
Wow.
you know, and
Wow.
so we have a big, beautiful country,
Wow.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
there's no reason to stick yourself in, the place that's going to become Escape from New York in, at some point.
Ironically, the overreaction to the public uh health panic, and I don't call it a public health crisis, I call it a public health panic, because I think I'm with you on the government overreach on that, uh has actually caused people to think that they don't have to be there. They don't have to be there. They can, with technology, I mean, here we are on Zoom, they can move to places like Wyoming, or you have a chapter called Big Sky, and I know that people call Montana that, Big Sky. The worry that I would have is that people are going to start filtering into those wonderful areas, I grew up in Colorado, and I've seen the Californication of Colorado politics, and it's not healthy. I went to public schools. I don't know. Did you go to public schools growing up?
I did.
Yeah, we had great public schools.
Yeah.
And did you feel like you had a good public education in
I had
Massapequa?
a great public education.
Yeah, I didn't feel like it was overly biased one way or the other. We had Democrat, um, not in the city, not in Denver. That's always Democrat, but we had a mix of people. It wasn't a one party state. Now it's a one party state.
Mhm.
And that's my worry, is that a worry for you? I mean, maybe not for yourself, but your kids. Like, if people start going to these other areas, uh, big sky kind of states that you call them free states, you've referred to it as America. Is that a worry? I mean, look at
It is a
Beto.
worry.
Beto almost beat Ted Cruz in Texas, if you can believe that, even with his rhetoric. I mean, he was only a couple percentage points off.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's really kind of
I
frightening.
don't really feel like commenting on election integrity right now, but
Yeah,
who knows
well,
what
there you go.
happened?
There's another point
Although
of
it
contact.
was close, apparently, but who knows?
Yeah,
As to your
sure.
question,
Yeah.
sure, it's a real question. I suppose, you could ask Liz Cheney. She tried to import as many Californians as possible into Wyoming, but not in time. There
Yeah,
is this
that's
problem,
right.
that people move away from the cities because they become Democrat-run hellholes. Then they move to a place that's really nice because there's fresh air and more freedom, and then they want to somehow turn it into the place they just left, but just with different freeways and
So
stuff.
odd.
And it's just maybe human nature, and I don't know. It
Maybe.
is concerning, but it's not something I focus on all the time. I
Yeah.
do want to go back to a couple things though. The public school I went to, there was a gun in the public school. Everybody
Okay.
knew that this one particular coach, who was a football coach, who was a science teacher, had a gun. He had a revolver in his desk drawer. And
What?
oh yeah. And
Wait,
everybody knew
what
he was
decade
the
was
guy.
this? Hold on.
Huh?
What decade was this?
I was in high school from 1979 to 1983. And
Wow. It's not
it
that
was
long
just
ago.
a well-known fact that Coach so and so, hey man, if you screw with him too bad, I'll tell you what, he's got a gun in his desk. And
How did you know this? If he
it
was
was
not there, were
knowledge,
you
it
able
was
to see it?
common knowledge. Everybody knew that this particular teacher had a gun.
And then the principal obviously knew, and he
Oh
didn't
yeah,
do
no, this
anything?
was like an allowed thing at the time.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. No school shootings, my
And there were no
guess.
schools. We had criminal
Fascinating correlation.
teenagers. We had lots of criminal teenagers,
Yeah.
in our school. We had people who cut class and did drugs and stole things and got in trouble. And some of them were like mini little criminals,
What
and
what was this coach's name? Do you recall?
I don't remember. It was too long ago.
Do you care to say the name of the school?
I mean,
You don't have
probably
to if you
doesn't
don't want to.
matter.
You don't want to.
Uh,
That's
but
fine.
the other thing I wanted to get back to is once you've made the decision to be strong in yourself and to defend yourself, then you're just now talking about which tool you're going to use. And people used to ask me, why do you carry a gun? And my favorite line back was, because bludgeoning is a messy business.
That's a good line. That is a
Because
really good line.
I'm going to fight to defend my life. If I have to bludgeon somebody to death with a blunt instrument, right?
Yeah,
And this would be disgusting to have to fight to the death with.
it is
Wouldn't I,
disgusting.
once I made that
Yeah.
decision, wouldn't I rather take care of that business from a distance,
Yeah.
And then
Right.
you keep in
And you're
mind that
safer that way anyway, too.
it's safer. And, and then of course, the fact that the brandishing is 80% of defensive gun
Right.
uses. Nobody wants
Right.
to get shot. Then you can take it even further. Like on my defensive handguns, I like to have a laser on it. Well, one reason I have a laser on it is so I have one
Yeah.
thing
Yeah.
that is in addition, because when the person sees the laser,
You
and
see
from what
where
I
it's pointed.
understand, they
Yeah.
try to brush it off. It doesn't brush off, right? They know
It
I'm
is an
about to get
extra,
shot.
that
Holy
is an
shit.
extra amount of information for them to process. Yeah.
Yeah, why not give them a
And it's
chance? I don't want to
personal.
shoot anybody,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Give them a
That's
chance
great.
to retreat. Give them a
I really
chance to
like
go
that.
somewhere else, live to tell their story. Maybe they change their path in life, right?
That's
But if
great.
they keep coming, I know for sure I'm going to put a hole where the laser was. That's easy. That's nothing.
Yeah.
So,
That's a great
you know, I,
idea.
I really, there are ways to, and if you hold that energy, like after I started carrying a gun, and I carried a gun every day for about 10 years,
What do you
uh,
carry? Can we ask?
Glock 30, 45 ACP. Um, although I have a couple other guns I'm playing around with, like a Glock 19 with the holographic MOS on it. Just as your eyes get older, you can play around with those other technologies.
Mhm.
But I have small hands, and so
Mhm.
the Glock 30 SF fits my hand perfectly.
Hmm.
It's a super accurate gun. I don't know if you know, it's among the most accurate Glocks.
I
And the
did not
reason
know
is it
that.
has the recoil spring is actually a double spring, and you could ask Glock, I suppose, but it's an extremely accurate handgun, and I'm accurate with it. And so that's the gun I carried. Sometimes in the summer, the snub nose, but mostly always the Glock 30. And even when open carrying, in a state that allows it, uh, I prefer to never open carry without also conceal carry. Um, you know, have the New York reload, which is slang for a second gun, right? And others could disagree. Like I said, I heard your podcast, saw some of it with MacGyver. He's a big
Maverick.
dude.
Maverick,
Huh?
yeah. His name
Maverick,
is
I'm
Maverick.
sorry.
Yeah.
Maverick.
The guy that
Tip my
he's
hat to him. A lot of
he's
respect. I liked
yeah,
his
yeah.
story. I apologize for missing his name. I'm sure he'll forgive me. I hope so.
I'm sure he will.
But he's a big dude, and
He's
he
a
can walk
Harley guy.
around with
He
his
likes
open carry at a biker event. And I pity the fool, to use the slogan, who decides to go up to him and relieve him of that firearm,
Right. Right.
But I'm not a big dude. So if I'm
Right.
carrying open because it's a circumstance, I'm out in the field and, open carrying, I'll have a pocket pistol, because if I'm out and I'm stopping for gas or something, somebody makes a play for it, the story is not going to be over. They're going to be disarmed before they get my gun. And open carry is very tricky that way,
Yes, it is.
because more than one person has been relieved of their firearm. We don't like to talk
Right.
about it in the gun community, but it happens from time to time.
Hmm.
So, I prefer concealed carry. I used to be thinner and I liked inside the waistband. Now I'm kind of fatter, so I prefer outside the waistband. I need the extra couple inches of waistband for my own self. And I wanted to also touch on the rigmarole and expense. The same people, I point this out in my book, the same people spend a lot of energy talking about, and this is somewhat virtue signaling for some, talking about, oh, you can't do this, it harms disadvantaged people. Can't do that, it harms economically disadvantaged people. Oh, but you can make it cost $400 or $500 more for a firearm for
Right.
them to exercise their right to protect themselves, when some of those disadvantaged people also live in neighborhoods due to circumstances beyond their control that make them more dangerous.
Wow.
And so you're going to make it so that they have to what? So San Jose has places that are not that nice to be in, but you need insurance now, right?
It's crazy.
What's that about? In South
That
Dakota,
they don't even think about that. I don't understand. It just totally never comes up unless you
well, they
bring it up.
willfully don't think about it.
That's true.
They put it in the box of things to not think about.
That's right.
And when you do that, well, I ask you, how intellectually honest are you being if you're the kind of person who has a box full of things not to think about because it's inconvenient to
Yeah.
the truth that you would like to embody, whether or not it's actual
Right.
truth.
Yep.
And in South Dakota, when you go in to get your permit, you bring your driver's license. You don't even need one anymore because of constitutional carry. But when I moved there, you needed one for conceal. You go in, you give your license, you fill out the form, you pay $10, and they take your information. They give you back your driver's license. They give you a slip of paper that is your concealed carry permit. The presumption is you're good to go. Okay. In the event it gets rejected, you'll get a notice.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
You don't have to tell them what guns you're going to conceal.
You don't tell them what guns.
Okay.
It's good for any concealed pistol. And it's different state to state, but South Dakota, it was a concealed pistol license, not a concealed weapon license, but it was good for any pistol, which means, hey, a MAC-10 is a pistol.
Right.
So you can carry your MAC-10 into the bank. You don't have to worry about anything.
Yeah.
You know, it goes to that joke, which I love gun jokes, right? But you must have heard the one where the guy gets pulled over and the cop says, "Do you have any guns in the car?" He goes, "Sure, I do." He goes, "Well, what have you got?" He goes, "Well, there's a 45 on my hip. I got a 9 in the glove box, and I got an AR in the trunk." He goes, "Damn, sir, what are you afraid of?" He goes, "Nothing."
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. I'm on the campuses, and in 2015 there was a mass murder on an Oregon community college. I think it was 2015. And the little mailer that the NEA sends out, I don't know if you know that organization, the National Education Association. It's monolithically to the left. They had a little blurb that I read to my political philosophy students in the fall of 2015. I had a student video record it, and it's up. I have the video. That's how I remember this stuff, because the older I get, I don't remember what or when.
Yeah.
But I read the notice to my students, and the notice was, I think it was the very last page of that mailer for, might have been August or October, I can't remember, of 2015. It was suggesting that we use, and in these kind of events, that we use a stapler to fight back. And I have to, document this, because the older I get, the more crazy that sounds, and it sounds like someone just made it up, but it's documented. They suggest you use a stapler. They say run, hide, and then at the very end, fight if you must. And I don't know, use a stapler, and so I had a stapler with me, and I pointed out to the students in that class at Moore Park College, when I walked over to the door, that you could not lock the door. You could not lock the door. And they suggested that we use a stapler. And this was considered progressive. The so-called people, the so-called position of the people recommending it were progressives. They would say, "I'm progressive." And the what I love about this anecdote is my students, which are just, they're normal California students, they instantly saw that was not progressive. Instantly. And I don't know why, but the faculty members can't see that. They couldn't see it until you just read it. You just point it out. And that's what I love about teaching, is the hope is not really lost, because if you catch the kids at a certain age, and if you just tell them the truth, most of the time they can see it.
What
And
happens though if they fill their their brains with lies? It's the
right.
same
Well,
issue, but in reverse,
like you
you know?
said, on the campuses, there's these boxes of things you can't talk about. And I'll give you another anecdote, which might be encouraging. I don't know. It's encouraging to me, and I feel like I need all the encouragement I can get. But I got hired to fill in for a professor at Cal State Fullerton, which is a big state school in Orange County. It's about 15 minutes north of Disneyland. And the class was constitutional law, civil liberties. And the only reason I got this job is because they needed to fill somebody right now. And I had a lady that was my professor for my PhD write me or recommend me on the phone or something. And she's a liberal Democrat, and her word carried the day easily. So I got hired to teach this class, and this is in the spring of 2018. And we had just finished the First Amendment. We were just about to start the Second Amendment when there was a shooting. And I don't like usually using the term shooting for rhetorical reasons. I like to say mass murder because I think it's more accurate. But I mean, it's accurate in terms of why we're horrified because shooting takes place at shooting ranges. We're not horrified. But so there's mass murder at this Parkland High School, I think it was called, in Florida. And it was a huge deal to the students. I mean, it was a huge deal to me too, but the students were really, for some reason, there was, I saw a higher intensity on social media, and it seemed like it was much better organized politically from outside forces coming into Florida to help these kids organize. And we had just started the Second Amendment. The timing of this, it's amazing. So I was at a loss of how to proceed for a few minutes, and I decided to ask the students what their initial take is. And I tried to be as objective as possible. I asked how many think that more, or how people say stronger gun laws. I hate that phraseology, but that's the answer. 80% students raised their hand. I counted and I did the math, and it was 80%. So I went full bore into the discussion. I had them read Heller. I had them read McDonald. And I read the suggestion that we use a stapler to fight back. I pointed out to them that they can't lock the door. And I had students go over and try to lock the door. Can't lock the door. And I pointed out that there's a law that prevents me lawfully I was trained by Navy SEALs and small arms.
Wow.
I'm prevented lawfully from carrying a firearm for self-defense on this campus. I'm a felon. I'm just as bad if I do that as the murderer trying to murder us, because that's a felony too. So I just told the truth. I just told the truth. I just had them read it for themselves. Did the poll again a couple weeks later. Took a few weeks to get through that material. And it was exactly the opposite.
Nice.
And I didn't pull any, I mean, all I did was not pull any punches. I just said, I want you to think about this from, there's nothing off limits to talk about. Let's talk about you want to talk about how unsafe you are? Okay. Well, I want you to notice the door. Can you lock the door?
Well, first, I honor you for going through that exercise. That's why you're a professor. And I was a little bit of a professor one time, but not in the same way. But I've always maintained, and I write in my book somewhere, that your brain is your biggest weapon.
Yeah.
Let's remember that.
You do say that.
We are thinking people. And if it really went bad, in that classroom and you all looked around, are there not tables and chairs that could be broken and jammed under that door in different ways to make it not open? You know, that stapler, if it was this big, well, you could use it, you have to get close.
Right.
What about the fact that while it takes a lot of guts and a lot of pain, it is a fact that if somebody can get close enough to get their hand over the ejection port on an AR, it will jam up. Fact. And that gun will be unusable, and the person can be disarmed. There's weapons everywhere you look. I mean, it sounds like you're maybe a Marine, former Marine or something. I don't know.
In the Navy, yeah.
You're Navy, but a lot people who have a lot more training than me would see it a lot quicker. Okay, I have very little to none, but I can apply my brain in a way that is analytical, and I could walk into any room, and if you asked me to, I could find lethal weapons everywhere.
Sure.
Or make them. Just by breaking apart furniture and getting a sharp piece of metal, you're going to be ahead of the game. So, of course, it's ridiculous that a person can be made into a felon for carrying a firearm to protect their lives if they're on the wrong side of some boundary, right? Some location.
Right.
And it reminds me of something that I thought about before the interview I wanted to bring up, which is, it used to be that I had heard about this, that in some Eastern European countries, before they changed over, they were still under communist rule. I had heard, I didn't verify, but for purposes of the discussion, let's assume it's true, that the third offense of drunk driving in this particular country that I was told about brought the death penalty.
Wow.
And I thought, well, if you're a two-time loser, why wouldn't you be carrying a machine gun and a cop pulls you over? You're going to shoot the cop, right? Because you're facing certain death otherwise anyway.
Yeah.
Now, if you back off of that extreme example, which is extreme, let's look at California. I'm not a California gun lawyer, but I have some basic familiarity. And it's my understanding that illegal concealed carry in California is a misdemeanor.
I think it's a wobbler. I think it can be charged either way.
Okay, I'll defer to you on that. Like I said, I haven't looked it up, but I thought it was a misdemeanor. You do lose your gun rights going forward after that in California if it happens. And yet, there are other things, right, that are coming to be misdemeanors and felonies. For example, in some places in the world, if you misgender somebody, that's a felony.
Wow.
Right? That's how it is in certain places in Europe. So there's this sliding scale as some activities are getting criminalized more than other activities, and you get to balance between those activities, right? And there's I'm sure you've heard this, but there are so many laws on the books that every one of us probably violates 3 laws a day just by going through your daily life.
I've heard that. Yeah. It's very believable.
If this blue resistance gets too crazy, what they don't realize is if they just criminalize a bunch of people to the point where people are saying, I'm a felon because I have a concealed carry permit, but I went over this line and I was on a sidewalk that was next to a sidewalk that was next to a parking lot that was next to a playground. I didn't even know about the playground. All it takes is a few of those cases getting publicized, and the average logical mind will say, well, screw it. Why even have a permit? I'm just going to pack a gun.
Right.
Right. Because it's already, what's the point of going and getting the paperwork and getting the background check? If I get caught, it's going to be a misdemeanor. And if I have to defend myself and I don't get caught, that gun's going to disappear. I mean, that's what the logical mind is going to say.
Right.
They're not going to lay down and get ground through the system if the system loses its credibility as to the fair application of the rule of law.
That's right.
So
we become more corrupt. We could become more like Soviet Union or places like that.
you know, to talk to, you know, people who are never going to be listening to this because they're never going to tune into the Republican anything, right? Just from sheer closed-mindedness.
Yeah.
But the fact is that the warning is to legislators going too far such that they lose their credibility in the minds of the average person,
That's
to
right.
give that person less incentive to be a legally compliant person. And if you have less incentive to be a legally compliant person and more incentive to protect you and your loved ones from violence, which is increasing in our society due to a variety of factors, it's a no-brainer. And that's why you'd be surprised how many people illegally pack a gun around. And they just don't say anything about it to anybody.
Yeah.
And it's not cool, but it exists, like a lot of other things that are not cool and exist. So, you know, a lot of the discussion becomes theoretical. You're a law-abiding guy, and you're gonna not carry a gun in a place that you're not supposed to. And there's a slice of people who are just straight up 1%ers, and they're criminals, and they are always going to carry a gun in a place they're not supposed to. But then there's this huge segment of population that's like the lodestone or the rudder of the boat, and
Yeah.
they move slowly, right, back in different ways. But if they come to perceive that their chances are easier to get through a situation where they get caught with a gun illegally than they are getting through a situation where they get caught without a gun, they're going to have a gun. And so it's really counterproductive.
It is.
The blue resistance is counterproductive. It's like a self-inflicted wound on integrity of our society. And that, you asked me to have insight into why they act like that in New York, but why did they act like that anywhere? There's a lot of self-righteousness. There's a lot of that.
That's right.
But there's no introspection. And so I would say, going back to my thesis, spending a year reading the original Socratic dialogues, right? Like the Apology, the Credo, all those, and then really thinking about, the way Socrates look at things, and then reading the original Gospels and trying to come to an understanding of why brave men and women did what they did out of conscience. It gave me a little bit of self-power to retain and reserve to myself my power to change my mind, right? Like, as the only person who can change my mind is me. And if I'm not willing to even think about it, it's never going to happen. But since I was open to thinking about it in the context of having a child to care for, or needing to come home to be a dad, because you're a single person. If you don't come home, it's a tragedy to you. But if you're a dad and you don't come home, it's a tragedy to your family that's going to live on in their whole lives. So, that means when I go anywhere, I've got a gun legally. Okay. I'm not a scofflaw, but, the Supreme Court says I have a right to a gun next to my bed where I lay my head. And that's part of my God-given right to keep and bear arms and defend my life. So if I'm traveling somewhere, you bet that when I get there, I take that gun. If it's in a place where I'm not allowed to have it locked and loaded, I'm gonna, withdraw it from its locked container in a privately rented room or motel room or whatever. I'm gonna load it. I'm gonna put it where it goes, next to my bed.
Right.
And, that's where the joke comes in, that the door is there for their protection. The door is there for their protection, not mine. Do not cross that transom, because it's all bets off at that point.
Yeah.
So
That's really good. That's really insightful background on why, which was the primary thing I was going to try to get out of you, which is how is it that you began seeing yourself as responsible for your own safety, and then being able to see the good intentioned, well-meaning laws and people advocating for that as a hindrance to common sense, not actually an expression of common sense, but actually a hindrance to common sense taking responsibility. It's very insightful. Yeah. I really appreciate you sharing everything with us like this.
well, I don't see how it could be used against me. I'm not running for public office, and I doubt I'll ever be a judge. Um, so I'd
I would
rather
vote for you.
I'd
I would. I'm sure there's a lot of people that would. I
I'd rather people get to hear the example. Look,
my interest is getting people in the middle that would never otherwise hear it, and giving them an opportunity to have the kind of internal transformation that you had without having to go through something traumatic.
yeah,
In other words, learn, isn't that what the definition of wisdom is? Learn from other people. It's like
yeah,
the
I
whole
don't know.
book of Proverbs. That the whole book of Proverbs in the Bible is learn from other people. You don't have to go through it.
I have a buddy who he used to be like I used to be a Democrat. I'm a Republican. I used to be a liberal. I'm a conservative. I used to be for gun control, and now I'm not. Um, and I used to be young, and now I'm old. I used to be single, and now I'm a dad. And there's all kinds of things I used to be.
Wow.
But I'm here. I'm me. I'm just who I am.
Yeah.
And uh, my experience has been a sum total that I've learned from, and I'm still learning from. I don't have every answer. I just know how it is for me, and that on these issues, my mind has not changed since I became aware of my own responsibility for my own self, my own protection. It doesn't mean I'm an island. It doesn't mean I can do it everything by myself. Uh, but it does mean that I'm willing to take responsibility. Like you said, you take responsibility for your own actions. And, perhaps that's
Right.
like a rite of passage that individuals need to go through. And sometimes it happens at different ages, and sometimes it happens when you're over 30 or over 40. But it does and will happen. And I wanted to point out a buddy of mine who used to also be a Democrat, is now a Republican, and used to also be liberal and is now conservative, and used to be against guns and is now a gun owner and a trained, licensed California security guard.
Hmm.
And the reason is he's very religious. He didn't used to be, but he took on his Jewish faith and Judaism. Okay, and he started tending temples,
Hmm.
and uh, then there's been a great rise, very sadly, in anti-Semitic activity,
Yeah.
and he knew the rabbi at that Southern California temple that got shot up, right?
Wow.
Interviewed that guy, and he then joined a licensed security guard company, and he sits for the license, and he solely to be an armed security guard during prayer at his temple.
Wow.
So talk about walking your walk and talking your talk, uh, because he stepped out and is willing to attend as one of the two licensed armed security guards. So he open carries when he's doing it. He trains for it. And again, he's up to date on his licensing for it. And he doesn't have a concealed carry. He's probably going to get one now that the Bruin case came down. but he was only licensed to carry while performing his duties as a security guard for religious services. And he also happens to be a filmmaker. And so he and his wife wrote a movie that they're currently producing. I have his permission to plug it for a second and say what
Okay.
it is.
Sure, yeah.
But it's called Guns and Moses.
Oh, no kidding. Are you
Guns and
kidding me?
Moses. Nope,
What?
Guns and Moses.
That's
And
awesome.
it's about a rabbi who goes through a process like the one I went through. So maybe people go see this movie and they'll see his progression, because
Oh, yeah.
one of his congregation, probably not using the right word in the Jewish context, but one of his congregation is murdered at a family wedding that's a religious wedding. And the person who's accused, this is a fictional story, the person is accused is a troubled neo-Nazi youth. But something about the thing doesn't make sense to the rabbi. And even though it would be easy for the rabbi possibly to go along and say, yeah, I'm sure it was that guy who posted hate on the internet and they have him in custody, he does a little digging and he finds out there's no way that kid could have done that crime. And he becomes a little like Columbo with your tie, he becomes like a sleuth about it, right? And as he starts to unpack the crime a little bit, he becomes a target for violence by the people who are really behind it. And he goes to one of his friends who's like an armed security guard in the temple, kind of. And what do you think I should do? He says, what, are you kidding me? You need to get a gun. And the rabbi's like, oh, no, I wouldn't. I don't even want to touch a gun. So the rabbi's arc starts out in that same mindset. Like, I don't need a gun. The police will protect me. And
Yeah.
in different parts of the film, he gets trained. He gets a 9mm, he straps it to his hip, and he becomes ready for armed self-defense.
Wow.
As a rabbi sleuth, protagonist in this movie.
Oh, man.
So I think it'll be fun. And, at some point you'll see this independent film around, Guns and Moses.
Yeah.
It'll be out in 23 or 24. And the gun control issue will still be with us.
Do you mind saying your friend's name? Did he give you permission for that?
I'm sure that I can. He did. His name is Salvador Litvak, and his wife Nina Litvak are a very awesome couple, and they
What's it? How do you spell the last name?
Litvak.
Oh, okay.
And they're just brilliant writer collaborators, and he's the director, and they have a producer, and they've made other feature-length films. In fact, if you like quirky independent comedies, they made a movie called When Do We Eat? About Passover. When Do We Eat? And it's got Jack Klugman in it in his last role before he passed away.
Oh,
And
wow.
it's just a wonderful, funny,
And he made that film?
movie. Huh?
He made that film?
Oh, he made that film many years ago. It's available on all the streaming services. You can rent it on Amazon or whatever.
Oh.
When Do We Eat? And and he and his wife have created a new feature film, this Guns and Moses. So
Wow.
it's got humor, it's got action, and it tells this story of this arc of coming to terms, not
Coming to terms.
words
Yeah.
used in the book, used in my book, but not words used in his movie. But really, everybody has to come to terms with
Yes.
their own
That's right.
self-responsibility. Like, if you're not going to do it in this lifetime, then when?
Right. Coming to terms. It's such a powerful title. How did you come up with that title?
Well, Chuck and I were talking about it back and forth when it came time to name the book. And I was driving down the road one day, and it occurred to me, because there was a part in the 2015 electronic version of the book that was a little bit different. And at the end of that book, I made a call of action to lawyers to come to terms with this in their lives, because lawyers are always responsible for these lawsuits, and they're responsible
That's true.
for the laws in the legislature, and being a lawyer, and calling on my quote tribe, if you will, of lawyers
Mm,
to come to terms with this for themselves. And that was in the original version at the end of it. And I thought, hey, what about calling it coming to terms? Because I'm a lawyer, and that's what lawyers do, right? We negotiate back and forth, and we come to terms on our agreement or a deal or our contract or whatever. So, and it's also like this other concept of coming to terms with your own vulnerability, or coming to terms with your own mistakes, or willingness to say I was wrong. That's part of coming to terms, and
right.
uh, and so he liked it, and we went with it.
Oh, wow. I, that's really an interesting connection with your business law background. It never even occurred to me that that's the same kind of phraseology that you use in contract negotiation. That's great. It's not only psychological, it's business law. That's cool. Yeah. And there's lots of layers to this coming to terms. You say it a few times, and it's a wonderful book. It's what, $9.95? It's not very expensive.
No, I got to be honest. It's 99 cents on Kindle, on
Oh,
Amazon,
even
uh,
cheaper. Wow.
and so
I like the hard copy. I don't like I have to have the hard copy. I make notes in I check mark things, and I have a pencil. Always use a pencil.
yeah. Well, I do
Pen.
too. If I'm not even sure if Amazon still sells the hard copy. Uh, if they don't, people could contact CRPA, and
Okay.
or they could, I don't know, perhaps email your show, or
Sure.
uh,
Yeah, yeah.
but it could be made available. I have a bunch of them, and I give them away two at a time. And what I'll do is, like, I'm going to an event in a couple weeks, which is for lawyers. A law firm's putting it together, I know, and we're going to go do a little bit of trap shooting. And
Cool.
yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
It's
And I'm going
always
to
a good
bring
time.
a box of these books, and my standard is I'll autograph them if they want, but I'll give a blank copy too, and say, hey, if you like it and you think somebody be interested in what's said in here, give it to them. What worst case, they throw it out, right? I mean, so
Yeah. Do you mind if I ask you one more question? I'm not sure if this is too personal, but you mentioned religious faith. Do you want to say anything about that? Do you have one? Are you in the Jewish tradition still, or?
I am uh I am of great faith, for one. uh I do have something in my past which I didn't mention. I was almost going to mention it, but I will now that you brought it up, which is that I participated in many years of traditional Lakota ceremonies, including the sun dance, which, if you're not aware of it, you could go
I
check
am.
out a movie called A Man Called Horse. But
Okay.
um, it's you fast for 4 days and 4 nights, and you do heavy prayer in the hot sun, and there's sacrifices made, and it's pretty deep and pretty real. So real, in fact, that you can't take pictures of it. Like, that cheapens it, and so there's no photos of it. um there's just what happened to you, and sometimes there are flesh offerings and piercings and things like that, and it gets really real, and
Wow.
mystical things happen. And that's there's a fortitude that comes through those kinds of experiences, because when you haven't eaten in 4 days, and you haven't had any water in 4 days other than the mercy that you're given in a sweat lodge, uh,
Wow.
your ego breaks down, and you're just who you are right there, and you're praying for mercy, and you're praying for others, and um, you become, at the same time, uh, pathetic and uh, more than your personality. You become connected to the people you're doing it with, and you become connected to nature in a way that's hard to describe. And you know, when you have visions in that kind of state, it's a visionary thing, like Vision Quest and things like that. You know, there's no forgetting the visions. Like, and if the visions come true in some fashion, there's no forgetting that, you know. And you know, the bros, as you would call the people you Sundance with, your sisters and your brothers, you know, they have some sayings like, you know, we're all red on the inside, you know. You know, we're all red on the inside. And if you come to the altar with a clear heart and a good heart, and you're invited to go do this thing, or you have a vision and you tell the vision to somebody and they say, you need to Sundance, or you have a dream, and the dream involves the kind of symbology that gets interpreted, and somebody says that, and you put it off, then you're just putting off the inevitable, you know. You just, you know, so things can come to you in a way that if you're open to them, they will guide you, you know. And so
Wow.
that was my personal experience, and it's not everyone's, but it is one that guides me to know the difference between lies and truth, and the difference between real and fiction, and the difference between good and bad.
Wow.
And I'm just blessed to have had that. And it doesn't mean you can't get it in the Christian faith or the Hindu faith or the Jewish faith. But the more direct your relationship is with our Creator, you know, then you're going to get it. Okay. And the more lenses you allow to be put between you and Creator, it's going to be harder to get that message. And so whatever anyone needs to do to get in the most close communication with God, Creator, whatever you want to call that awesome, omnipotent, omniscient being that's the fourth flowingness of all life, do that, you know, like, because I think that's why we're here, you know. And that's
Are
how I
there
see it.
any are there any other non-ethnically Indian folks? I mean, for people that don't know, Lakota, is that the same as Sioux?
Yeah.
Okay. So,
Well, the Sioux is the French name.
I
Uh,
didn't know that. I never
yeah.
knew that.
The,
Oh,
the
okay.
Sioux, is a French name for the Lakota people. There were
Okay. So that's why
7
those two
tribes.
names are always together. Okay, gotcha.
There's the Oglala Sioux, for example. There's you know,
Oh,
the Santee Sioux. There were 7 tribes altogether. There are other tribes that do Sundance, but it was considered a Lakota tribe. The word
yeah.
Lakota means ally, and it refers to the native people of the Great Plains.
Yes, it's Great Plains Indians. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if you're invited to be part of those ceremonies and you are respectful and open, there's a good chance that you're going to have some kind of mystical experience. And
Is there any peyote used?
no, I mean,
Okay.
there are Native American ceremonies that involve peyote, obviously.
Right.
But
Right.
this is a very sober kind of ceremony. And you don't need peyote if you've been fasting for 4 days, you know, and dancing in
Right.
the hot sun, and
Wow.
the like, you know.
How are you staying hydrated during this time? It
Well,
sounds like you'd be very dehydrated.
well,
Or is that a priority? It's not a
you
priority?
get a cup of water in the sweat lodge,
Okay.
which you get every day, morning and night. So you get a couple cups of water in the sweat lodge. Um,
Okay.
it depends on whose Sundance it is and how
I mean,
strict it
obviously
is.
you're still alive, so you survive as far as dehydration goes, but
Yeah,
sounds like
I
it's very
just about
physically
passed
taxing.
out one time. I did it 13 years.
Wow.
And then I stopped doing it. It's if I had a vision or a dream and I had to do it again, I would, but thankfully I haven't. It's not easy, and um, it's not for the it's not something that you take for granted or that you engage in frivolously.
Wow.
But it is something that, like, for example, I had a buddy who was invited to dance with a family, group of families to do the Sundance, and he asked me to come out as a supporter. And I went out one year, and I decided I'd like to do that. And I didn't just decide by myself. I had some inkling of it, in prayer, meditation, and then I pledged, and it was a year of preparation to go do that. And I used
Wow,
to
really?
be
Wow.
younger and in better condition, but in order to prepare for it, there's a joke among Sundancers. They say, how do you get ready for Sundance? Get ready. That's it. You just get ready, whatever that is to you. So
Wow.
I was living in Maui at the time, and I used to fast in preparation, for days at a time, limit my water, dry fast even for a day, run uphill 3 miles in the hot Maui sun in order to get my cardio up, and to
Wow.
know where my lines were, and to know that I was in good physical condition to do it. And I started my first uh, I was 35, I think, when I first started sundancing. Um, or maybe I was younger. I can't remember now. Let's see. Yeah, I was 35. I started in 2000. And I did it for 13 straight years, and then
Wow.
I got some signals that it would be a good time to retire. Toward the end, uh, I did have a few tough days, and there was one day where I basically was about to pass out, and people could see that, and they took care of me, and they cared for me, and they let me have some water. The idea is not to torture people, but to allow everybody to get to that space that they need to be in, so they're going to be open to receive, some true knowledge from the creator. And so
Is
that's
there,
what I
is
did.
there, and you obviously trusted the folks that were running this thing, that it was like official, like it's legit, going back historically to the traditional practice? Like,
Well, I could see
was
that
there a
it
high
was.
rank person there that was from the tribe,
Well,
or
the
someone who
tribe is
knows?
just a political entity, so you don't, it's made by the Indian. Uh, there's I think a Indian government act or something of the mid
Yeah,
30s.
that's right. That's right.
So
Yeah.
you don't look to the tribal government for spiritual things, but you look to the elders and
Okay.
to the people
All
who've
right.
been carrying the weight of these practices in their own traditions. And then you have to make up your own mind. There's charlatans out there.
Yeah.
But if somebody's charging money for it, walk away. They're not legit.
That's a good
Uh, that
rule of thumb.
money and spiritual things in the Lakota ways don't mix together. You don't mix money into it. So
So it's kind of an honor to be asked if you want to participate in this.
it is, uh, and like I said, I was blessed to
Wow.
have an opportunity and to learn from it, and to not
Yeah.
think that those ways become my ways. I don't own any of it
Right.
or anything, um, but there's a lot of wisdom there that can be shared across cultures. And if
Yeah.
some of that wisdom can help uh, people and families, uh, and the native people are willing to share it because they see the good in the person, then that's up to them, because it's theirs to share. It's not mine to take, nor did I, nor would I. Um, but I it was mine to be shared with, in the sense that they offered to share with me. I offered to allow them to share with me, and to pray and commune with people in a good way, and to respect their traditions, which I did, and just sort of leave it at that.
Wow.
But but that also helps you become able to change your mind, because you realize that there is something beyond you, and that gives you a little bit more humility to be able to do that. And so it gave me humility. All the experiences that I had in the book that are after the shooting, the mass murder, the
Right.
101 California Street incident, happened after I was had gone through Sundance. And so they reflect the person that existed after Sundance compared to before. And
You had done your first Sundance before the murders
no,
in San
what
Francisco?
I'm saying is, other than those murders, other than
Right.
the murders happened in 1993,
Right.
right?
Okay.
And then we
That's what I thought you
skip
said.
forward to like South
2000.
Dakota or Seattle
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
Hawaii, and all those things in the book that show that I was
Yeah.
willing to change my mind
Ah,
happened to
okay.
a person who'd already gone through
Yeah.
several Sundances.
Oh, okay.
And those Sundances will break you down. I've talked to a lot of military guys who I've Sundance with, who've gone through boot camp, and they've gone through combat, and they've gone through war and PTSD and hell and back,
So you're
And
using the term Sundance to mean traumatic event? Is that right?
no, I'm using it to refer to the actual
The
ceremony.
actual ceremony. Oh, you
But
had
what I'm
gone
saying
through
is
when
it's
was your
humbling.
first when was your first Sundance again?
In the year 2000.
Oh, okay. So you were ready for the Sundance because you had been through some stuff. So what you're saying?
I was ready for
Yeah.
whatever all the reasons are that make a person ready. But I was ready. Everything.
You're the first person I've ever met that's actually done a Sundance
All
that
right,
I know
well,
about,
you might
I
meet
should say.
more, but
Yeah, yeah. I've
you
read
know,
about them. I had to read it for my PhD. We had to do a whole thing on Indians. We had to. Indian law.
yeah, no, there's a great
Huge
substance
tree.
there.
Yeah, constitutional law is filled with it. Yeah, it's a huge issue. Well, that's interesting. I mean, that's pretty wild. That's crazy, man. It's not crazy in a bad way, but it's just like it's blowing my mind that you have that experience. Wow.
Yeah, well, I guess I'm just not, an average cat.
You're a fascinating individual, David Frankel. You are. You are. From Massapequa public schools with a coach that had a gun in the no shootings back then, to Amherst College, student of Hadley Arcus, of all people, to NYU Law School, and then to San Francisco, where you went through this. That's a picture of the building, right?
Yep.
To Seattle and South Dakota and Hawaii, through pre-Heller to post-Heller, and now packing heat for yourself, going through Sundances, legit Sundances. I definitely don't think I've ever met anybody quite like you. The book is, again, Coming to Terms by David Frankel. The subtitle, I gotta have that in there. A Mass Shooting Survivor's Reckoning with Vulnerability and Self-Protection, published by Cold Law Publications, which is affiliated with Chuck Michelle somehow. And we thank you for coming on there, talking about the book.
Well, thank you very much, Lucas. It's been a pleasure, and perhaps we'll do it again sometime.
I would love that. I can't wait to meet this. I have to meet this guy you mentioned that's making this film. I have to meet this guy at some point.
I'll
So
put you in touch by email.
that'd be great. Thanks, David.
Thank you.